You know, I took it on years ago that I know what saved my apiary, okay, and so that's what I'm here for, is to teach you about what saved my apiary, and so when I'm anywhere, I can go anywhere I want now. I don't care. I could probably go to any country, but you know, imagine I'm in Northern Ireland and some guy travels all the way from Scotland just to say, whoa, you know. I saw your YouTubes. It's everywhere I go now. So I saw your YouTubes, and I started raising Nucleus colonies, and now I have more bees than I know what to do with. And that's happening everywhere. It's amazing. So that's what I'm here for. So anyway, so my talk is really about what I did to save my apiary. And a lot of that has to do with Nucleus colonies and making Nucleus colonies and wintering them over, you know, wintering them. Winter.
We don't have that.
Winter. We have capital W. It wasn't too bad this winter. It was a fairly warm winter. We only had a minus 28. That wasn't too bad. Last winter was a bitch. Man, last winter we had a minus 37, and it was below zero for 2 weeks at a time, and it was...
I don't think we got down to 40.
Right. Yeah. But, you know, it really is, it's actually good for bees, I think. Personally, I think that's good for bees, because our bees are European bees. And European bees are used to a winter break. And so they have this brood break, and they take a brood break starting in probably October, and they don't start raising brood again until March. And so everybody takes a break, and the queens take a break, and they don't wear out so fast like they do here in Florida. And the beekeepers get a break, as it should be, and... You know, I don't want to work bees 12 months of the year. There's no way. Sam, you couldn't get me down here. You couldn't pay me to come down here and keep me.
We did.
No. Not to keep my bees here. I sent my bees here in '98. I sent 400 hives here, and they came back in pretty rough shape. So I would never do that again. But anyway, so my talk is about Nucleus colonies and some rambling and whatever. I actually changed the title. If you go online and you Google my name, or you go to the National Honey Show, and the National Honey Show is a big honey show in England. You've never seen a honey show like this one. I mean, there's 1,000 entries. It's incredible. Rooms full of shelves. And then they have a bunch of lectures at there too. And so if you go to their National Honey Show website and you go to the Education tab and you go to the Lectures tab, you can see all the lectures that have been done in the last 3 or 4 years. And any of the lectures that I give are there. So what I'm trying to say is, listen to what I say and don't write it down. Don't write so much stuff down that you can't listen. I'm not saying don't write anything down. Write down thenationalhoneyshow.uk. Okay, and then you can see it again, and if you want to write down some highlights. But don't try to write everything down, I say, because there's a lot. And so this talk was actually originally was called The Sustainable Apiary. And then when I told Donna that I would do the Sustainable Apiary, she said, it's already been done. I said, what? Oh, well, Larry Connor did it. Well... I've known Larry we're friends for years and years, 30 years. And yet he's starting to call his talk that, a sustainable apiary, and I asked him not to, and did it anyway, and so it has nothing to do about sustainability or anything that I do with Nucleus colonies. He just likes the title. And people in the audience are going, what? What? Yeah, what? Yeah, but I'm just now trying to explain, so that's why the title is different. But if you go on the National Honey Show, and it's called the Sustainable Apiary. Okay. So anyway, have we got a clicker, an advancer, or?
I don't know if this is going to work. Yep, that'll work.
Okay. Okay, so anyway, I've really fallen in love with the UK and beekeeping over there, and bee authors, beekeeping authors. I mean, there's so many bee books, and they're really a lot of good ones. And so I really got into old bee books, and I'll say something pretty soon here. But you know, you got to read the old bee books. The old bee books have everything that everything except varroa mites in the old bee books, you know. And you can read some of these old books, you can follow what the masters taught us. You know, that was back at the time when they were discovering all this stuff. And they're very cool books, you know, Miller, Root, all these guys. And so I happened to find this one book, and he's got a quote in it. And this quote is exactly, I mean, that answers the question. Now I think I can go home. No, seriously. I mean, there are no problems that you can't solve by putting something into or taking something out of a nucleus. Wow, that's so true. And so I'll try to tell you why. And so, oh yes. So are your bees alive in the spring? Well, yeah, I don't know. Sam said that everybody's bees live, and you don't need to treat for varroa mites. And well, everybody's bees live. Do you have bees that die? You must have beehives that die, right? And so, you know, I asked, what do you want from your bees? And I've asked people at meetings, and, you know, are you trying to make a living? Is there anybody here trying to make a living with their bees? You know, there's a few here. Usually there aren't. Usually there's no more than a handful. Even in a crowd of 200 people, there's a handful maybe that are trying to make a living with bees. Well, all most people really care about is that their bees are alive and that they can watch their bees and have fun. And so most of the people in this room, all you're trying to do is have fun with your bees. And so, are your bees alive in the spring? Well, or are they dead from? And then you can go through a whole host of reasons why your beehive might be dead. You know, here's a nice colony. This is probably April. They're finally getting going, starting to raise some brood, and they ran out of food and starved to death. You know, shame. And it's always the good ones. You know, it's always the good ones because they started raising brood and they ate all their food. Or dysentery. Oh, those are 3-story hives. Yeah, and dysentery. And dysentery can come from lots of things. It's, oh, now everybody says, oh, you got nosema disease. Well, it's not necessarily nosema disease. You know, dysentery can come from other things. Any stress in the winter cluster, anything that makes them more active. Varroa mites, hello. Varroa mites. Varroa mites. Tracheal mites. You don't even know what a tracheal mite is. You've never seen a tracheal mite, you know. Picture books, but you never had beehives die from tracheal mites. How many people here kept bees before tracheal mites? That would be about 1990. Really? 2. And that's how it usually is. Most everybody's gotten bees in the last 5 years. Unripened food, long periods of confinement. I mean, my bees go from November until April some years with no cleansing flights. Then, of course, there's nosema disease. So this is, these are spores, nosema spores. I picked up a bee off the snow, and dead bee, and squished her guts on the slide and looked at it, and the thing lit up like a Christmas tree. This is at 400 power. At 400 power on a hemocytometer, which is a little grid on a slide, and you can measure, you know, white blood cells or whatever. Well, you can count varroa mites. I mean, nosema spores. One nosema spore in the field of view is 50,000 spores per bee. How many spores per bee is this poor? Millions. Millions. And this would be your tracheal mite. So this is what a tracheal mite hive looked like when it died. So this apiary, it's probably February, and it's probably in the 20s. It's sunny, but it's cold out, too cold to fly. So here's a production hive. This is actually a production hive with some nucleus colonies wintering on top. And so this is the upper entrance for the production hive, and this is the bottom entrance of the nuke. So they're just sitting on top of each other. But the whole apiary is quiet. There's no bees coming out of these hives except for this one. Look at them. They're pouring out of the upper entrance. They're pouring out of the bottom entrance. They're clustered down here. They're dying in the snow. They're all pooped up. Everything's all pooped up. And in the springtime, there's a big pile of dead bees in the front of the hive, and there's no bees left in the hive. And they're all full of honey. And so they were so active, and they get indigestibles in their guts. They have to relieve themselves. They fly out, but their wing muscles are affected by the tracheal mites, and they can't fly, so they fall out in the snow and die in a pile. Tracheal mite. And I guess you guys don't have an issue with this. I've been told that you don't have to treat here. I don't know.
Have them.
You have them, right.
Have her own.
Right. It's just that they don't overwhelm the hive. Aren't you lucky? Come up north. Right, scoots. So you got scoots. Good, lucky. We don't want scoots.
Don't listen to his comments. He will show you that he's the greatest.
You know, or in over in the UK, they're looking at this picture and they're saying, "Oh, what happened to that? Was it badgers?" No, it wasn't badgers. It was black bears. And I have a fence, you know, but the battery died. There's the fence post. So the battery died, and she got in and smashed the hive. There was 25 hives in that. The only thing left were the ones that didn't make it through the winter. You know, there's one there. Probably didn't make it through the winter. And there's one there. So she didn't rip it apart, but look at everything else is smashed. Carried off in a trail through the brush.
That was one night's work?
No, probably a week. Because a week before, 2 weeks before, this was a good yard, and the battery died. And they're just coming out of hibernation. This is at the edge of an old dump, and there's cavities for her to have her den in, and smorgasbord. There you go. So, does it really matter why your bees are dead? No, it doesn't matter why your bees are dead. So how do you replace those bees? That's what matters. So how do you replace your dead honeybee hives? Well, you buy package bees. That's very common to buy package bees. Well, I don't know about you guys, but package bees don't live in Vermont very well. They're southern stock. I know, I'm not trying to start a fight here. You know, it's the S word, I know. The S and the N word. A different N word. Excuse me. Excuse me. But I get in trouble for this, you know, so that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about colonies, stock that was selected from stock that never went through a winter. How can you have stock that will go through a winter in a good percentage that came from stocks that have never seen winter? Is this something I said? Okay, so that's all really was all my, you know, I don't know. I know of 3 studies that were done, one in California, one in Maine, and one in Virginia, and all said the same thing. 80% of the packages are dead within 1 year. So something's wrong, and I don't know what it is. I started with packages in 1974, $10.50 a package, delivered, you know, and so I don't know what's wrong now. All I know is what people tell me. I don't use packages, you know, I don't buy bees, but. So there's something wrong, and I don't know what it is. Is it, I don't know, is it bad queens? Is it they're trying to make hundreds of thousands at the wrong time of year? Is it a treatment they're using, or is it bad queen stock? Is it, I don't know what it is. Is it nosema? Is it, I mean, when one of my honey customers bought 24 packages and 12 of them were drone layers. Whose fault is that, you know? He didn't get any reparations for that. He didn't get paid back anybody. He bought them from a reseller. The guy says, I didn't grow those bees. He calls up the guy in Georgia, I didn't sell you those bees. I mean, the poor guy is out 12 hives of bees. But this happens all the time, and so everybody are pretty sick of packages. Can you buy a package and have it live? Yeah, sure. I'm just saying that overall packages are not working for us in the north. Well, you can catch swarms. So yeah, you guys can catch swarms. We can't catch swarms. We don't have swarms. Nobody. Where are the swarms? We used to have swarms. I used to put my name in at the fire station. They'd call me up. You know, I'd go rescue the neighborhood. Swarms. Everybody's looking at the window blinds because there's swarms hanging in the tree. You know, I go there like this and put them in a box and so the swarms aren't there anymore. And you can split your colonies. Well, we have a very short season. And if we split our colonies, say on dandelion, that was the traditional time. And then the books will say, well, it takes 4 weeks for a colony to rebuild back to where it would have been. Well, that's not true. A colony will never rebuild back to where it would have been if you hadn't split it and if it didn't swarm. And so what happens if you make a split on dandelion and then the weather changes and gets bad? And now they don't build up right. And then the parent doesn't build up right. And so now you got a swarm, a split that's not building up right and the parent that's not building up right. Or they build up right, but then you have a dearth and come the middle of June. And now they don't make any honey. So you lost the early flows because you split the hive, and now there's no late flows because there's a drought. I mean, there's just too many things that can go wrong. If everything is perfect, yeah, maybe they'll build back up and make a honey crop of some amount. So splitting the colonies, I mean, that's one way to stop swarming, but it's one way to make increase, but it's also a good way to reduce the honey crop you make. What about nucleus colonies? Well, I don't know how much nucleus colonies are, but getting pretty expensive. I think I've seen 135 to 150 here in Florida, something like that. They're going for over 200 up north. Better be selling them for 225. Sell out. They'll sell everything they can get. So, you know, you put your bees in a box and they die again, and you plop down your credit card and you buy another package of bees or another nucleus colony, and then they die again, and then how many times are you going to do that? And, you know, so well-meaning beekeepers get out of the business or get out of the hobby because they can't keep their bees alive, and they're sick of spending money on bees all the time. You know, and, you know, the spouse says, you know, well, we need a new refrigerator. Who's going to buy the refrigerator? Well, you know, and your dog messed on the floor in the guest room. Now we need a new carpet. And, you know, and our daughter's going to go to college in 2 years. And on and on and on and on. And why would you spend another $165 on a $30 on a package on a nuke? And packages are going for $125 and more in Vermont right now. So, you know, you're spinning your wheels. It's difficult. It costs a lot of money to get into bees and when they die all the time. And you know, I'm a commercial beekeeper. I'm trying to make a living at this. I can't be spending my money like that. But anyway, so this is just after snow melt. So there's really no green grass yet. Just a little hint of greening up a little bit. So this is probably in April, probably early to mid-April. And I got these 2 nucleus colonies that I overwintered in my apiary right now. All I have to do is put them in the dead hive. I didn't pay anybody anything. I didn't spend anything on my credit card. And they're my bees. And I grew them in my apiary. So what would you do if you had a bunch of those in your apiary? You know, would you ever run out of bees? You'd never run out of bees. So I wanted to know a little bit more about this wintering of nucleus colonies. Originally, it was showed to me by Kirk Webster, who's a Vermont beekeeper. And he was wintering nucleus colonies. And we all thought that he invented this. And then I read Brother Adams' work, and I realized, well, Kirk is just about identical to what Brother Adam is doing. So Kirk got it from Brother Adam. Well, who else did this? And where did Brother Adam get this? So I started buying old bee books. And it really blew my mind. How many people used to winter nucleus colonies? So I went by publication date of a book or articles in a magazine. So Webster published his in '95. I found a book from Vernon Vickery. He's the Professor Emeritus of Entomology at McGill in Montreal. And he wrote this book, and he talks about, one part of it, he talks about wintering nucleus colonies. Even in Manitoba. Manitoba is colder, a lot colder than we are in Vermont. And he had such good success with it that he said that wintering nucleus colonies in Canada was the solution for the closed border. a lot of the Canadians used to kill their bees in the fall, depopulate the hives, take all the honey, extract all the honey out, buy packages in the spring from Georgia or somewhere, restock the hives like that, let them go through the whole summer, make as much honey as they could, kill the bees in the fall. And that worked for them. Well, then when trachea mites came to the U.S., the Canada border, Canadians closed the Canada border to bees from the U.S. And so they were out. What can they do? Where do they get their packages now? You're not going to believe it. New Zealand and Australia. So they ship bees to Canada from the southern hemisphere. And this is somehow economical. And did you ever hear of Tropilelaps clari? Tropilelaps clari is another mite. And it's in Indonesia. It's in Southeast Asia. It's on Apis cerani, which is the Asian honeybee. And it's worse than Varroa. And they found Apis cerani in Australia. And they can't get rid of it. They tried to get rid of it. So now it's taken up residence in Australia. And it's the natural host of Tropilelaps. And they keep importing packaged bees from Australia and New Zealand, and we're going to get Tropilelaps. It's Canada does that. It doesn't matter. You get one female mite here, and I think it's all over. It's another nail in our coffin. It's worse than Varroa mites. The only thing is that it can't live without brood. So if you're keeping your bees in the north and you have a broodless period in the wintertime, that mite can't live. So you guys are all going to be bringing your bees to my territory. But that's nothing to laugh about. It's a bad one. And so I started buying bee books. I spent a fortune on bee books. I was in the UK giving a talk, and it was actually my birthday. And so I started off by saying it was a special day. It's my birthday. And everybody's going, oh, it's your happy birthday. No, well, that's not really the reason. My wife is at the bee meeting today. And it's the first time she's ever been to a bee meeting. I've only been keeping bees for 40-something years, and she's never been to a bee meeting before. And then I had to spill the beans about how much money I spent on these damn bee books. And she hadn't a clue. She did not know. I didn't. All these bee books kept showing up. They're $5, $10. No. Some of them were considerably more than $100, but whatever. I found what I wanted. I'd get a book, I'd rip it open, I'd open up the index, Nucleus colonies, and I'd turn the page to Nucleus colonies. And all of a sudden, all these beekeepers start showing up. R.O.B. Manley, a British beekeeper, a fantastic author, first person in the UK to have, in the British Isles, to have 1,000 hives. You can see when he kept bees. And he wintered Nucleus colonies. If you ever want the coolest bee book you'll ever read is called Honey Farming by R.O.B. Manley. If you ever get a chance to read that one, it's an excellent book. Snellgrove. You know Snellgrove. You've heard of the Snellgrove board, another British beekeeper. He wintered Nucleus colonies. Miller. You've heard of C.C. Miller. 50 Years Among the Bees, 40 Years Among the Bees. 1 Year Among the Bees. It's pretty much the same book. It's got a different title on it. Pretty much the same book. He says something in his book that you can winter 2 nucleus colonies in a hive, and they form one cluster as if you shoved a division board down between the 2 of them. They don't form when they're in a double box, in a double nuke box. They don't form 2 individual clusters. They form one big cluster with that division board between them. You know, that's amazing. I thought I discovered that. Honestly, I did for me. And I'm showing people, look at this. Look how they make 2 half-circled clusters. And then I read it, and I found the same quote, not in 1911, but in the ABC of Bee Culture. He writes something in 1891, the same quote in 1891. So that means that C.C. Miller was wintering nucleus colonies before 1891. Wow. Lesley Bill. Lesley Bill is a woman who followed, who accompanied Brother Adam to to Africa to find the Monticola bee. The Monticola bee is a dark bee that lives up in the mountains above the plains. It's down in the flatlands is where the scoots live, Scutellata live. Up in the mountains, they're supposed to be darker bees, and they're gentle. They're not defensive like Scutellata. And so they went over there to find them, and she went with him. And she gives a little history of Buckfast Abbey. And she talks about Brother Columban. Now, Brother Columban was the beekeeper before Adam. And so when Adam came as a child, they put him to work finishing the stones. They were rebuilding Buckfast Abbey at the time, starting in the 1800s, and they finished, I don't know when, 1920 maybe. And so they get all these kids from Germany and places, the families they couldn't take care of all the kids they had. So they'd send them over to an abbey or something, and then they put the kids to work, as little slaves, and finishing the stone. Well, Adam was a pretty sickly kid, but he took to the bees, and so anyway, she mentioned something about Columban devising a beehive that he could overwinter nucleus colonies in this beehive, and then in the summer he would take the excess brood out of these nucleus colonies and use it wherever he needed it in the apiary. I went, oh my God, there's another one. That's something else that I came up with, that I discovered for me anyway, that these nucleus colonies aren't just future production hives. They can actually build you resources that you can use in the apiary to build up your hive so that they're strong enough to take advantage of a honey crop, or to raise queen cells, or to whatever, and I'll talk about that. And that was in 1900. Said, no kidding. Somebody's making brood factories in 1900. Wow. So what happened? We forgot. Okay, and then there's another English author, Ron Brown. And Ron Brown wrote 1,000 Years of Devon Beekeeping. If you probably don't know where Devon is. Devon, if you look at at England and the island, and it's got a peninsula on the south end that sticks out to the southwest. Cornwall, Land's End, Cornwall, County Devon. Cornwall, Devon, Somerset, something like that. And so this Woodbury guy was a skepist, and he had skeps, but he had a skep that wasn't enclosed at the top. It was open, and he put a roof on it. And when you super a skep on the bottom, not on the top. And so you put another skep ring, just a ring, on the bottom, and put the colony back on top, and they build down into it. And then by the end of the honey flow, the rings on the top will be the honey flow of the honey, and you cut them off with a wire or something, and then winter the skep. Well, sometimes the colonies were so strong that you could cut off the next ring down and put it on a bottom and put a cover on it, and they'd raise a queen bee, and he'd overwinter it. What's that? It's nothing more than overwintering nucleus colony, really. It doesn't have movable frames. That's the only difference. So this has been going, and that one was at 1862. This has been going on forever. People have been wintering nucleus colonies forever. What happened was the packaged bee industry came along. And the packaged bee industry, it started in about 1890 with A.I. Root. A.I. Root knew he could get queens down south, but he didn't have strong enough bees. So he put out a call to anybody that can send me live bees. He'll pay $1 a quart, or $1 a pound it was, I think, $1 a pound. And it worked out so well that the second year he paid $2 a pound. That was the beginning of the packaged bee industry. And the packaged bee industry has always been a good industry. They gave us a decent product at a fair price, $10.50. And if you wanted them May 1st, you got them May 1st. And now, it's, at least up north, they're 100, 120. If you want them May 1st, you might get them May 21st. Oh, there's been another delay. Every year it's another delay. And 80% are dead within a year. So something has happened. And now people are starting to look in other directions. So these are just some quotes, and I'm not going to go through these texts because I don't want to take up the time. But you can read it on the website, on National Honey Show. So this is a bit of a history of my apiary. So, as I said, I bought 2 packages in 1974, and both of them died in the winter. I took all their honey away. I didn't know anything about bees. I just took all their honey and they starved to death. So, you know, I learned my lesson, and I'm not one that, I'm not easily defeated. And so I bought 10 more, and I started learning how to winter bees. And so in I wanted to go, I was actually making maple syrup. But it costs a fortune to make maple syrup because you got to buy a mountain if you want to own it. And bees, you don't have to buy anything. You just have to have the bees, and you can put them on somebody else's land. And so I learned how to winter bees, and I was starting to do okay. I probably had a couple of hundred hives. And a job opening came up at an apple orchard in Chazy, New York, which is just across Lake Champlain from me. And so in '82, I took that job. And they had 500 hives, and I had 200. So now I had 700. And I really didn't know what I was doing, but I BS'd my way into the job. And so I learned real quick how to manage a bunch of bees. And so I turned their operation around. They went from 850 to 150 because of foul brood. And then the guy before me cleaned it up and got them back to 500 again. And then I took over, and they started making honey again. And in those years, they were paying me $110 a day to manage their bees. In 1982, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's incredible. That's a big pay in those years. But I was only working 40 days of the year. And our first child was born in '84. And lucky my wife was a registered nurse, and so we had a fairly steady income. But you know, I wanted to do my share. And if you look at my Social Security report, there's a lot of zeros back there. You know that report you get every year, a lot of zeros back there. And so I told them, listen, either sell me your bees or I'm gone. You know, I'm going to go find a job, do my own. I could do better if they were my bees. So they actually did sell me their bees. So in '86, after pollination, I took over. So now I had a contract, and I had to put 600 beehives in their orchard. And you know, which is not easy. And we didn't have forklifts. You know, we had Armstrong lifts. You know what the Armstrong lift is, right? So 3 guys and 3 guys on a truck and three trucks. So 9 guys moving bees, 3 nights in and 3 nights out. And it's killer work. I mean, when you work all night and all day, it's killer work. You beat up the bees, and you beat up yourself, and you beat up the equipment. But we're, you know, what was I now, 30-something? Dumb, no brains. And so it didn't matter how hard you worked, you know, you just did it. And so I bought their bees, and then tracheomites came in about '89 and started wiping out our hives. And some right in the beginning there, you could go down, and some guys especially had 50% or more loss every winter for a number of winters. And then came varroa mites. And the same thing happened again. And we're constantly losing bees to varroa mites and tracheal mites, which eventually we overcame with breeding. That was an easy one. You breed from strong colonies in the spring, no more tracheal mites. It was easy. It took 3 years, 4 years, done. No more tracheal mites. I wish varroa was so easy. But I had a contract, and I had to provide 600 colonies. And if I'm losing, if I only got 400, I got to come to find up some bees. So I was buying singles out of South Carolina and Nucleus colonies out of Florida. I don't remember what the nukes cost, but the singles cost $55 for a 10 frame with a cover and a bottom. And so it wound, and I'd buy queens. And so it wound up that I was, my pollination check was going towards buying bees and queens every year to keep my numbers up so I could fulfill my contract. So here I'm spending all the money for the contract to fulfill the contract. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And I knew I had to do something. This was getting crazy. And so Kirk Webster, the Vermont beekeeper, said, come see what I'm doing. So I went to his place, and it was probably middle of April in Vermont. So we're a month away from apple bloom. And we go out to his apiary, and he's got nucleus colonies wintering on top of his production colonies a month before apples, and he's got little bee beards hanging out the entrance of the nucleus colonies. You're kidding me. Here I am, working my fanny off, spending all my money on bees and queens to try to keep my numbers up so I could pollinate this money and get the check so I could buy more bees and queens. And he's got all these bees sitting in his apiary already. I mean, that was it to me. The light went on. The old light bulb went on. And so that's when it started. And so this is basically what happened to me, you know. So where do you start? You can take brood from strong colonies, right, and make a split. And that's the traditional way. That's the way we always did it. We'd split our bees at dandelion time and make all our new buy queens from California or someplace, and we'd split up our strongest hives, and then some years they wouldn't make a honey crop because of the weather or whatever. Well, what about if you sacrifice non-productive hives? Everybody's got a number of hives in an apiary that aren't productive. They're otherwise healthy. They're not diseased. They don't have parasitic mite syndrome so bad they're crashing. They're just not productive for whatever reason, other than foul brood or like that. You know, the queen, it's the queen.
Lazy.
Oh, yeah, lazy bees. I mean, or they swarmed and they're just building back, but they're never going to make you any honey. Why not just sacrifice those colonies? Get rid of them. What do you usually do? Let's see, where am I here? Where am I in my talk? So here's an apiary. It's obviously making a honey crop. I would say the bottom 3 boxes are the brood nest. So this is the honey crop. You know, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 mediums and 2 deeps. You know, I don't know, 200 and something pounds of honey on that hive. But you always got one beehive that doesn't do it. It's not making a crop. And so what do you do with that beehive? You requeen it. Oh, I took that slide out. You requeen it. And why do you requeen it? So that next year it will be a productive beehive. Well, does requeening a beehive guarantee you that it's going to be a productive hive? Or that it's even going to be alive in the spring? Not really. Well, suppose you took that non-productive hive and you sacrificed the brood and the bees and whatever empty combs and you put it into nucleus colonies and you made 4 nucleus colonies out of that colony. And you overwintered those nucleus colonies. Now you got 4 instead of 1. And even if you lost half of them, you still got 2. That's got to be better than 1. And you ought to see these nucleus colonies. See, I don't know if it's different here. You know, all I can do is tell you what I see. These things explode. They explode in the spring. They are so vital. They got so much energy that they outproduce some of the overwintered hives. They're amazing. And so you split them up into nucleus colonies. So what do you use for equipment? Well, there's all kinds of equipment that you can use. You don't have to use the same thing I use. This would be a Webster nuke. So it's a double nuke box separated by a movable division board feeder. And the feeder has entrances one on this side and one on this side, so that this nuke goes in the feeder there and this nuke goes in the feeder there, and it's got a grain bag on top, so they can't go in the fill hole. And so they're isolated. The feeder goes right to the bottom board, and the bees can't cross around or under or over it, so they're isolated. Or you can have a solid divider, same deal, 4-frame nucleus colony with a 3/4 inch divider in it. Or you can have bags. You can have a bag for the inner cover. Or you can have little wooden inner covers with feed holes. Or you can have single nuke boxes. Or you can have beer coolers. You know, styrofoam. Bite me. But it doesn't matter what the box is made of. It doesn't matter the style of the box. What matters is what's in the box. And so too many people are saying, well, I can't get that feeder. I can't make this thing. Well, you can get those. And in Florida, they'll winter fine in those. Whether if they're 2 or 3 stories high, it doesn't matter. You just build them up. Bees work very well vertically. Bees don't have any problem vertical. In the north, they have a problem horizontally. That's why horizontal hives don't work so well in the north, because the bees get stuck on one end and the honey's on the other end, and they starve to death in the wintertime. But vertically, they don't have a problem. Where do our bees come from? Europe. What was the natural cavity, bee cavity in Europe? A tree. Trees grow vertically. They don't grow horizontally. I mean, that's how heat rises. And there's lots of reasons. And so this is the configuration that I winter most of my in. So there's a double nuke box for the bottom. It's got a divider like this. And then it's got 2 half-width supers that sit right on top of that divider so the bees can't cross between the colonies. So there's 2 individual colonies there, 4 combs over 4 combs. So there's 8 combs in that. So it doesn't matter what you use for the box. You just use what you have available.
Is there anything in between the layers, or is that 4 nooks total, or is it just...
No, there's two nukes there. Okay. There's one here, and there's one over here. So this side here, it's got to divide. The divider in the top is the walls of the supers.
Right.
And the divider in the bottom is that.
Right.
And the supers sit directly on top of that, so they can't cross over.
It's a double stack nuke.
Right.
Double stack nuke. The reason I have it in a single box like that is because it's got the same footprint as a beehive. And all my covers fit. I don't have to make special covers. I don't have to make a special box. I just got to put a divider in it. And so these guys here, this one here would have an entrance right here. And this one over here would have an entrance on the other side. Or you can do it front and back. You don't have to do it side to side. Okay, so what do? So you identify the colony that you want to sacrifice, and you might have a super or 2 on it. You take the super off, and you get it down to the brood nest. And so maybe you got a double deep brood nest. And so most of the honey and the brood will be in the top box, and some of the combs in the bottom box will be empty. And so you start pulling combs from the top box. One thing you don't want to do is you don't want to smoke them too much. If you smoke them, it drives them off the combs. See, they're on the combs. If you're careful and you don't use a lot of smoke, the bees are going to remain on the combs just the way they like to be. The young bees are taking care of the brood, you know. If you smoke the heck out of them, and you drive them out the other end of the box, you know, there won't be any bees on the combs. And now you have to adjust it by shaking and like that. Well, the bees do a better job than we do. They know what bees they want on those combs. As long as you don't smoke the bees off the combs, there's enough bees on those combs to make one of these nucleus colonies. You know, and don't forget, you're making them, well, I'm making them in midsummer. So it's not cold anymore. You know, in a spring split, you got to put enough bees in there to take care of those 3 frames of brood or whatever it is. So you shake extra bees in there. You don't have to do this with these. This is enough. So you start pulling out frames. And so the first frame is a honey frame. So each nuke needs a honey frame. So I put the honey frame next to the divider. And then you pull out another one. That's another honey frame. So you put it on this side of the divider. Now you've got 2 nukes starting. Each one has a honeycomb. And then you pull out a frame of brood, and you put it here. And another frame of brood. And this can be a really good one. Slot 2 can be a real good frame of brood. Slot 3 can be a partial frame of brood. So it's some brood, some pollen, some brood, whatever. And then an empty comb. Yep. And then an empty comb out here. And so and then you do the same thing, and if you have extras, you can set up another box. And so you can usually make 4 nucleus colonies out of one of those non-productive hives. and just enough just enough bees. You see, the bees are just enough there to cover the brood.
So there's 4 queens.
Not yet.
No, there's no queens.
Oh.
There's a queen in the non-productive hive, but it's a non-productive hive. Why would I want that queen? I get rid of that queen. Kill that queen. You don't need that queen. I mean, when something goes wrong with a beehive, who do you blame? There's nothing else you can do. You blame the queen. Get rid of those queens. Get rid of that old queen. So I'm going to, off with her head. Exactly. Exactly. That's, that's one of the things that people have is for backyard beekeepers. That has got to be one of the hardest things there is, to kill your queen. You know? It really is. So, I'm going to laugh, but, so be honest. How many people name their queens? Come on, be honest. Several people here, you can say, it's okay.
He doesn't have any yet.
Oh, yeah.
He's got her named already.
Okay, there you go. So if your queen is named Clover or Melissa, how the hell do you kill Clover or Melissa? You can't do it because it's Clover or Melissa. The hive tool test. They never pass. Never. Okay? But I admit it. I name my queens. I do.
And your cow.
Every one. And every one of them is named Martha. and if I have to get rid of Martha, it's no problem because I got Martha. You have to be ruthless. You really have to be ruthless. You guys have a long season. I have a short season. Lesley. Are you serious? I'm 67. I've learned. It took me a long time. But, and so, but yeah, you have to be ruthless. I mean, that's, if you got a failing queen or a queen that's not performing right, get rid of her. Now, it's easy for me to say I raise my own queens, but. So anyway, so I'm setting up these nucleus colonies. And so this is sort of what they look like. And so now I've got a queenless unit in each of these. And I'll put the cover on, and I'll move them to a new apiary. Because I don't want the older bees to fly back. I mean, their hive is gone. I've dismantled their hive. So they'll go in the other hives, but they'll depopulate the nucleus colonies. So I move them to a new apiary that's, a couple, 3 miles away at least. And then I give them queens. You can give them queen cells. You can let them raise their own queens, or you can give them queens. Well, I'm starting with a non-productive hive. I'm going to let them raise their own queen. But where did those genes come from? From the non-productive queen. So off with her head. And so, so then I move them to a new apiary. And you can give them a ripe queen cell if you have a ripe queen cell. If you can buy queen cells, there's people in Florida that sell queen cells. So you can buy a queen cell, or you could buy a queen. And so I wait that same day. Some people say you have to wait 24 hours. You kill the old queen and you wait 24 hours, and that's not true. It only takes the bees a couple hours to know that they're queenless, really. And once they know they're queenless, they'll accept a queen. So we make up a bunch of nukes. We might make up 20, 30, 40 nukes and then take them over to a yard and start a whole new apiary of nucleus colonies. And one of the problems with giving them queen cells is that not every virgin makes it back to the hive. And not every colony will accept the virgin that you just gave them, the queen cell you gave them. So the virgin will emerge, but they'll kill her and raise their own. Or the virgin will go out to get mated and get eaten by a bird, or get hit by a truck, or get smashed by a lightning storm, rain, or come home and go in the wrong hole. That's too bad for that one, So you wind up with a queenless nuke that has no way of raising a queen because she's gone out. There's no more young larvae in there. So now it's hopeless. I think, better to give them a laying queen. Because when you give them a laying queen, you get almost 100% take. Almost. 3, 4, 5% probably is what the failure rate is. Or a caged queen. I prefer giving them a caged queen. I'm an outie. I'm an outie. I'm not an innie. I take the attendance out. But and then this is what you get. So this is what you wind up with at snow melt in the spring. You wind up with these things. I mean, look at the population in this nucleus colony. It's unbelievable. And you put that in a 10-frame box and stand back because they absolutely explode. So the production colonies are supporting the nucleus colonies, right? Your non-productive hives are what's going to make up your nucleus colonies for overwintering or for whatever you do, right? So at what cost? Sacrifice production. If you're splitting up production hives, you're losing production. You're losing numbers of colonies. You're splitting them up. I mean, it's a good use of that resource, but your numbers are going down. Hopefully, you'll have enough nucleus colonies to build the numbers back up again, but you're still losing numbers. It's a good place to start. So how do you manage these nucleus colonies? Well, one of the biggest things is swarming and absconding. Swarming, trying to get a colony that's got a prolific queen to stay in a small cavity. They don't want to stay in a small cavity, and so they're going to swarm. And how fast they do that is amazing. So let me see if I know where I am. Okay, so so how can you avoid swarming? You can expand the colony. So if you had a Webster movable division board feeder, and this was in the middle, and you had a nuke on each side, you could take one of the nukes out and put it in another box, and locate the feeders at the sidewalls and give them each 4 more combs. So now each of your nucleus colonies would have 8 combs instead of 4 combs. So you've increased the volume by 2. You've increased the combs by 2. But it's cost you twice as much equipment because you need 2 bottoms and 2 boxes and 2 feeders and 2 inners and 2 outers. So it takes twice as much equipment. But you can do it. I mean, that's workable. You can put an excluder on top of a double nuke box. As long as the excluder is contacting the divider. If the wires don't contact the divider, the queens can cross under the wires and get at each other. If they can't cross under, they're confined to their cavity. You could put an excluder and supers on, and the bees will go up from both nucleus colonies and work side by side in those supers and not fight with each other. And they don't go down the other side and the ones from this one go kill that queen because she doesn't smell right, or vice versa. They don't do that.
They know how to.
They're both laying queens. That's all that they care about, is that they're laying queens. They don't fight. That's a fallacy. This thing about you got to put the queen cage in the hive for a certain number of days so they get the smell right and they get used to her smell, that's not true. That's what we've been taught, but it's not true. You take somebody like Brother Adam. So Brother Adam would go to he knew a hive had to be requeened. So he'd go to a mating nuke and pull the cage out and pull the queen out and put her in a cage. Go to the apiary where the hive is that needed to be requeened. Pull the old queen out, put her in a cage. Open the cage up and run the new queen that just got pulled out of the mating nuke. Run her right in. Take the old queen back to the mating nuke. Run her right in. No smoke, no paper, no candy plugs at the end. It's because they're laying queens. They smell like laying queens. They act like laying queens. You take a queen that you bought in the mail, she's not a laying queen. She's now a non-laying queen. I catch my queens,
For a few days, so
it does overnight. So I catch somewhere 100 and something queens every 4 days. Bring them home, I put them on my table. big fatties. In the morning, they're shrunk up. They're no longer laying queens. You put one of those in a hive like that, and they'll kill her. So it's not about the smell. So they don't go over and kill each other's queens. The only problem I've ever seen is when one of them got superseded, they didn't raise a queen on that side because they already had a queen on the other side. So that's the only issue I've ever seen with that. Well, the problem is when you take that and you take these supers off when they're full by putting a triangular bee escape on top of the queen excluder. And then you put your supers back on top of the triangular bee escape, and the bees go back down into the nukes, whichever ones they feel like going into. It's not like, oh, we live in this nuke and we live in that nuke. They just go down. Then you take the honey off, and now you don't have one drop of honey in the bottom there, in the brood nests, because they put all their honey up above. And they got nothing to eat, and you have to feed them immediately or they'll starve to death. I didn't like that. I mean, I feed my bees, but I'd rather not have to feed them everything as they winter on is sugar. I'd like to see them wintering on honey. So I quit doing that. You can make additional nucleus colonies. So here's a group of nucleus colonies, all two-way nucleus colonies, and they're getting too strong. And so I'll go in each one, and I'll pull out a frame of bees and brood, and I'll put it in another nuke box. And when I have enough to fill up the nuke boxes, that one's full. And when I'm done, I'll take, 10 more double nuke boxes or whatever weight, put it in another yard, give it a queen, and I stop them from swarming. And I've made more nucleus colonies. But that's when I used to keep them in singles like this. And so trying to fight them, to keeping them in singles, when you have a few, it's not so bad. But when you have a lot, when you start getting up to 300 or 400 or 500 of the things, you spend all your time trying to keep them in single boxes. And eventually you lose. You can't fight your bees. You cannot fight bees. Once you get behind bees, you're done. I mean, you're behind bees. If you know what it's like to be behind your bees, they get ahead of you. It's very hard to catch up. And they're and at this point, pulling a frame of brood out, and when it's a good flow on, and pulling a frame of brood out of each one of those and putting in a foundation or something really doesn't do a whole lot. They're building up so fast. For instance, I was out manipulating some of these, and I was pulling out 2 frames of brood out of each 4-frame cavity and putting a foundation in, one against the feeder and one against the sidewall. And I did that it was 10 o'clock in the morning. I can remember the day. And then at 4 o'clock, the bee inspector from the state of Maine came over to see what I was doing. And we went back out to that apiary and pulled combs of those foundations out of those hives that I had put in there 6 hours before. And the foundation was already had like 1/8-inch cell walls on the foundation, and there was eggs in there already. And that's how fast these things explode. And so it doesn't take very long before those 2 frames of foundation were drawn out, even if the comb was only halfway, and it was full of brood already. So pulling brood out, trying to keep them in singles and pulling brood out and working them like that intensively, doesn't work. I mean, it works over for a short time, but eventually they get ahead of you.
When you're pulling out those frames, you're looking for the queen. And
Oh, of course. Don't take the queen away.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah, it's
Right.
kind of a challenge.
Sometimes.
It gets a little easier, but
And then you get tired,
yeah.
and you don't see.
And I did a split the other day. I put the queen in there, and I took out of 3 different hives, and
Yeah.
I grabbed the queen out of
One of them.
hives. And,
Yeah. That's why you use an excluder.
yeah.
And you shake the bees off the combs, and you make your split, and you shake the bees off, and you put an excluder on the hive, and you put the box with the nuke on top and above the excluder overnight, and the bees go up there through the excluder, and they won't be a queen. And you didn't even have to look for the queen.
If you look in
It's
there,
quick.
put it back.
Quick. But anyway, so remember Brother Columban taking brood out of nucleus colonies and using it in the apiary to boost hives of what needed to be boosted. This is Buckfast Abbey, the new Abbey, as opposed to the old Abbey. This is part of the old Abbey. It was built in the 1200s. This was rebuilt in the 1800s. You know what happened to it, right? Henry VIII. Ah. Henry VIII needed money. Where's the money? In the land, in the peasants, in the serfs, right? Who owns the land? The church. You get in a fight with the Pope, cut your wife's head off, take over all the Catholic abbeys, kill all the monks, and you got the land. Knock down the abbey so they can't come back. That's what happened. Beautiful place. But you make bee bombs. What's the bee bombs? You take brood out of those nucleus colonies that they're getting too strong, and you put those combs of emerging brood in a bee box, and when you get a box full of brood, you go to that hive in your apiary that's kind of slow. It's got a nice queen. It's kind of slow. You put that box of brood on the bottom board, and you put your slow hive on top of it, and what happens? It explodes like somebody dropped a bomb on it. Imagine if you gave 10 frames of emerging brood to an average size hive in your apiary, what would happen to the thing? It would absolutely explode. That's why I call them bee bombs, because it's just like somebody dropped a bomb on them. So that's managing them in single-story boxes. And this is an apiary with single-story nuke boxes, 2 nukes in each box. But that also means moving bees. I hate moving bees. I pollinated apples for 20 years. I don't ever want to move another beehive as long as I live if I can get away with it. I hate moving beehives. And it means moving them when you make them. So I make them. I move them to a new apiary, give them their queen. I manage them all summer long. Then because they're singles, and we have snow that's this deep, if they're a single and they're buried in snow and we get a cleansing flight possibility in the wintertime and they're buried in snow, those bees don't get to take that cleansing flight. So we wintered them on top of production hives. So here's a production hive, and here's the nuke, a double nuke box. So they each get a double nuke box on top. And that's okay, and they winter fine there. They're up out of the snow. We used to think that maybe they get some amount of heat from down below. But during the tracheomite time, the bottom hive, the parent hive, would die, and both nukes would be alive. Or the parent hive would die, and one of the nukes would die, and one of the nukes would winter over fine. So that makes me wonder, how important is that shared heat? I mean, obviously, if they make one cluster against the divider, there must be some kind of shared heat going on. But I don't think that's the most important part of it. And so then in the springtime, when we have to go check them for weight down below, you got to take the box off the top, check the one down below, put the box back on top. Then when you want to really get into bees, you got to move all these nuke boxes to a holding yard so that you can manage them, and so you can manage the production hives and get the supers on and all that. Well, that's a lot of moving. That's a lot of work. So there's a better way than managing them as singles. This is an evolution. Can you see the evolution happening here? Well, you got to think like a bee. And how do bees think? They don't think out, they think up. Well, why not super them properly? Why not take a nice strong colony like that, a nuke, that's running out of room, and put a super on top of it? And so you make a bunch of these little half-width supers. So if your box is 16 1/4, these are 8 1/8. And now they can expand up. And you don't need 2 bottoms and 2 boxes and 2 covers. All you need is 2 of these little guys here. So that's what I started doing. And it really helped. It really helps the management. They expand up. They need less equipment. I mean, you don't even need covers. You can run out. It's an old chipboard, OSB board. I ran out of covers. They don't care. The bees don't care. They can live in a cardboard box. Okay, so then when I add that super, I'm adding foundation. And so I want them to draw foundation. I want to put them to work drawing as many combs of foundation as I can. So the first year I did this, I just went around and I put 4 frames of foundation on top. Sam was there. Remember that? Remember that year when you were up and we were putting foundation and they were all swarming? Is he here anymore? Yep. And what happens is when you put foundation on top of a strong beehive, that needs immediate expansion room. Foundation sitting up above them isn't immediate expansion room. They don't see that as expansion room. Some of them will start to draw comb. Some of them will swarm.
If the nooks are growing so nice,
Huh?
if your nooks, the way you describe, are growing so nice, you keep adding up. Why would not you put this individual nook in a big box and let them grow to a hive?
But I don't want, first off, I'm starting them in the middle of the summer. So if I want a beehive in Vermont to grow to a full-size hive, I have to start it in May.
Yeah, but
And then, so I'm starting these things in June and July. And I don't want them to be, I don't want each one of these colonies to be in a full-size hive. I can winter them fine in a smaller unit. I'll explain to you. Okay, so here's the colony. About 10 days ago, I made these nukes up, and the brood has started to emerge. So we've got 1.5 frames to 2 frames of brood in these nucleus colonies. When that frame, and just enough bees to cover the brood, but when that brood emerges, all of a sudden that box is full of bees. So I have to add more room to them. And so what I did, instead of just adding the foundation on top, I baited them. So I took this frame. Remember the frame that I put against the divider was a honey frame. I don't mean a big capped crystallized frame of honey. I'm talking about it's got some capped honey and it's got some open honey, enough to feed to get them, keep them going. Well, the center of the brood nest is the divider. The center of the brood nest is not the 2 combs in the middle of the nuke. It's the divider between the 2 nukes. That's the center. So these 2 combs here, that's the center of the brood nest. So because that honey is in the center of the brood nest, that's not acceptable. So they'll remove that honey right away, and they'll put brood in it. So 10 days later, that comb, that honeycomb is full of brood. And so what I do is I remove that comb of brood and replace it with a foundation. And then I put my empty super box on top, and I move that frame of brood up into here, which is going to be at the divider, and 3 frames of foundation. Now you've got foundation in contact with brood. That's a violation of bee space. That's instantly on it. They're right on it. They start to draw it out right away. So I'm doing this at about 10 days, 12 days at the most. If you wait too long and they didn't accept the queen, if they don't accept the queen, they start emergency cells. And while those cells are still capped, sealed, you can cut them out and give that nuke a new queen. Once they hatch those virgins out, now it becomes more difficult, right? Now you got to find the virgin. And sometimes they've got a virgin, now they don't want to accept a queen. So if you get in there about 10 or 12 days, if there's one with emergency cells, she hasn't emerged yet. Those virgins haven't emerged yet. And you can get rid of them, and you can put a new queen in it. So that's what I do. And then, because they have foundation in contact with brood, they start to draw it out right away. And I have to go back in this in 2 more weeks. Because they will have that, if we're on a flow, they will have that foundation drawn out, and they're filling it with brood already. Right away. It's amazing how fast they do it. And so about 2 weeks after I give them the foundation, I go through and I look at to see, I look underneath the combs. You know, one of the things about these nuke boxes is they're so light. And so you're handling a 4-frame box, not a 10-frame deep or an 8-frame deep. You're handling a 4-frame deep. Very easy, very light, but also you can look at from underneath. So you can crack the box loose and tip it up you don't even have to pull frames out. You can do a lot of your work underneath. And so here's the comb that was the honey. It's now brood. And here's the 3 frames that they've drawn out already. This is probably about 2 weeks. Look, they're already capping brood in the thing. And guess what? So they're starting a queen cell. There's a queen cup. Is there anything in it yet? Well, you got to open it up to look. But right away, you can see right away what's going on in this nuke. They may be starting swarm preparations. So you open it up. If there's a need to manipulate it, you might add another story. We had such a goldenrod flow last year. It was incredible. So we took the honey off, and I try to super my bees so that when I take the main honey crop off, the brood nest is light. And then if it's light, I don't put any supers back on. And then the goldenrod honey comes in, and they fill up with goldenrod honey for winter. And they were light this year, very light. So we didn't put any supers back on for the goldenrod flow. And when we went around in the end of September to weigh the beehives, they were all way overweight. So it happens fast. So they were filling up so fast with goldenrod that I took the top box off. I put another 4-frame box of combs on, and I put the box that had the brood and the bees back on top. So now you had 4 combs of brood and bees, and 4 combs that were empty, and 4 combs of honey and brood and bees. And that was the end of swarming for them. But I also mentioned, let's see, where am I here? But I also mentioned absconding. And absconding is different. And I would dare say that if you're going to have nucleus colonies like this and try to keep them in nucleus colonies here in this heat, the bees are going to abscond. And what happens is they can't cool their cavity off. And it's too small for them. They can't. First they beard, and if they can't cool it off properly after they beard, they fly away. The queen and most of the bees just fly away. They come out like a swarm, but they don't hang in a tree like a swarm. They just fly like, it looks like a cartoon arrow of bees. You know those when Yogi's getting chased by that arrow of bees? That's what it looks like. And they just fly away. They don't do this. They don't cluster on anything. They're gone. I've tried to run after them, and they're gone. They don't land on a fence post. They're gone.
Where do they go?
Who the hell knows? I don't know. I don't know. I told Seeley that, and Seeley and his help there, they're going to try heating. They're going to put heaters in nukes and see if they can get them to abscond, because I don't think he believes me, but whatever. So, and they're different than what's left behind is different than a swarm. So if a swarm goes off, they leave queen cells behind. If an abscond goes off, there's no queen cells. They just fly away. And then you come back at a later date, a few days later, and there's some bees in there, but there's not enough bees in there to have raised all that brood. And there's emergency cells, not swarm cells, right? Because when the swarm left, the only bees left there are emerging bees and whatever bees were out in the field when the colony left, and eggs and larvae, and so they start raising emergency cells. And so that's how you tell the difference between an abscond and a swarm.
How was the queen flying if she didn't lose weight?
That's another fallacy. They can fly. I've seen them. I've stood there watching them go. So, and no cells. So, anyway, that's my take on it. So anyway, so you have these nucleus colonies. And what are they good for? Well, obviously, they're good for replacing your losses, or making increase, or requeening weak colonies. So you have a weak colony in the springtime, and they're not building up very well. And what do? You could take brood out of another hive and give it to them like that. And what are you doing? Well, you're you're strengthening the colony for temporarily, but if it's a queen issue, that's not going to last very long. So you're putting good wood on bad. You know, you're putting a good brood in a hive that's got a failing queen, and they don't make it. And they never really recover. What happens if you have a nucleus colony in your apiary and you find a weak hive? And you get rid of that old queen, and you give them the nucleus colony with the queen in it, with the new queen in it. You just requeened that hive, and you boosted it with brood. See, one of the things in the north is we can't have queens early. Most people want their queens in May, late April and May. We can't raise queens in late April and May. We can raise really nice queens in summer, and we can overwinter them in nucleus colonies. And now we've got our queens. So you have to look at nucleus colonies not as, you know, increase or sales or whatever. If you look at them as a queen bee with support staff, the role of a nucleus colony totally changes. They're queens. Look at them as queens, and that's totally different. You can make brood factories, which I talked about. You can set up cell builders, which I will talk about. And you can use them as the brood source to make this year's nucleus colonies. So if you have overwintered nucleus colonies, you can let them build up and do what Brother Columban did and make all your nucleus colonies from the brood that's being made in the brood factories in the overwintered nucleus colonies. And now you can leave your production hives alone. You don't have to split anything. All you got to do is swarm control. So this is a brood factory. Same picture as before. 2 nucleus colonies, 8 combs each. And once you have a supply of nucleus colonies, now what? Before it was the production colonies were supporting the nucleus colonies. Now, with brood factories, the nucleus colonies are supporting the production hives. Do you understand that? That you're using the nucleus colonies to boost your production hives or to make nucleus colonies for next year's production hives. So what supports the nucleus colonies? Brood factories. Brother Columban's brood factories. So here you go. Here's 4 nucleus colonies. And I put a 3rd story on them. And so here's one I'm going to take apart. So here's the top box and the middle box and the bottom box. And I start pulling out frames of brood and bees. And so I have like 100 of these. And I'll pull out enough frames of brood and bees, emerging brood and bees, to prevent the brood factory from swarming, but not so much that it dwindles. Because I want it to continue filling combs of brood, because I want that brood to use in my apiary. So I'll go through in rotation. I'll start at the first one, and when I have enough for today, I'll stop. And then in a few days later, I start again, and I'll start where I left off, and I continue on. And eventually, I'll get back to the beginning again, and I just keep going around and around and around and around, pulling frames of brood out, putting empty combs back in.
What kind of numbers are you working with? How many of these you got?
I've got about 100. I got about 100 of these brood factories. Okay. I go into winter with about almost 500 nucleus colonies.
How did you get to 4 frames?
Well,
working with 8s and you just split it
no,
into 2?
nope. If you put a divider in the middle of a 10-frame box,
Yeah.
Unless it's a very thin divider, you can't put 5 combs on either
I
side.
see. Okay.
So that's really all.
That's your starter point.
And I don't like a Luan divider because that's not enough. enough.
No, they can hear each other.
Well, they can cross over too because you leave little cracks and. Yeah. So anyway, then I take the brood and bees out and I put it in a shaker box or a holding box, and it's nothing more than a queen excluder nailed on the bottom of a good hive body. So it's a holding box. So the bees, if there's a queen, she can't leave. The bees are going to stay in there. They're not going to go off on the grass. It's easy to carry it. I understand we have a shaker box for tomorrow. Did I hear somebody say shaker box? Cool, you'll see a shaker box. And so this is an apiary that was made of nucleus colonies made with brood that came from brood factories. The whole apiary. And that's what's cool about this. You can make apiaries and apiaries and apiaries. And what did you sacrifice? Nothing. Your production hives are still producing. Your nucleus colonies are just nucleus colonies. Their whole reason for existence is to make you brood frames of brood. Well, so you're starting these nucleus colonies. Where do you get the queens? You know, you got to have queens. You got to have the best queens that you can absolutely have. That's part of the problem, I think, nowadays, is that the queen stock is inferior.
There's too much inbreeding.
Inbreeding, raised at the wrong time of year when the conditions aren't right, and whatever. I don't know. But this is what you get when you do it right. When you maximize the jelly, you get these queens like this that, you know, God, she's gorgeous. You're going to laugh. That's right, Martha. You're going to laugh, but I have dreams. I dream about her. And, you know, I mean, and I love hairy legs. I think hairy legs are pretty nice. You know, and she's got wicked hairy legs. You know, and just her whole fat ass, and I mean, she's the cleft on her thorax. You'll buy queens that won't even have that cleft on the thorax. Underneath that's where the wings attach, the wing muscles attach. Christ, they got such a small thorax, they don't even have that cleft. They're junk. They're inferior queens, raised under bad conditions. So how do you get queens like that? Royal jelly. By maximizing the amount of royal jelly fed to the larvae. And how do you maximize the amount of royal jelly produced in a hive? You maximize the number of nurse bees. The more nurse bees in the hive, the more possibilities of feeding jelly to those larvae. And where do those nurse bees come from? Exactly. Now there's different ways. The traditional way to start queens is to raise queen cells is the swarm box starter and queen right finisher. So you harvest, you go to the production hives, you harvest nurse bees from the production hives. You put them in a swarm box. It looks like a nuke box with a screen on the bottom to keep them cool. You leave them in there for 24 hours, queenless. Then you give them a graft. Then you leave them in there for 24 to 36 hours. Then you take the graft and you put it in a strong hive above a queen excluder. And they'll go up and finish the cells. Well, first off, in order to harvest nurse bees, you're using up production hives, right? You're depopulating production hives to harvest nurse bees. How do you harvest nurse bees? You split up a double deep. You put the queen and the sealed brood in the bottom, and you put the combs of unsealed brood in the top box, and they're separated with a queen excluder. And over the night, you shake the bees off and let the bees go back up through the queen excluder to get back on the open brood. And who's going to go on the open brood? The nurse bees. And the next day, you shake the combs off the combs of open brood into your swarm box starter. And now you've harvested nurse bees. And what does that do to your production hive? Not good things. Depopulates the production hive.
Interrupts the brood cycle, everything.
Everything. But it's the most popular way for raising queen bees that we have, probably in the world. Let's see. So that's not sustainable. And if you have lots of extra colonies, how many people here have extra colonies? You know, not so many. So what's the answer? Brood factories. Again. So you harvest brood, and you set up these cell builders. So this is the beginnings of one of my cell builders. So this is a production hive, and the bottom 3 boxes are the brood nest. And in about the end of April, I put on 2 medium supers. And then about, this year I start May 10th, but around May 10th, I take off, I make sure there's no queen cells in this hive, because this is where the queen is. And I take one of those partially filled supers and I elevate it over a queen excluder. And this is my cell building yard, so I got about 35 hives in this, real strong hives in this yard. But right over here are brood factories. And I get a 65, 64, something brood factories right on the other side of this apiary. So I'll go over to that, those brood factories, and I'll start pulling frames of emerging brood. And when I have 2 frames of honey and 7 frames of emerging brood in the box, no queen, I'll bring it back to this, and I'll put it above the queen excluder. Because that's day 1 in the process. So 10 days later, I'll come back to this hive, and now it's going to be my cell builder. Now, 10 days later, after I do this, there's no more larvae in that box, right? They're already been sealed. So it's emerging bees and sealed brood. And there's no larvae in there that they can use to make a queen bee. And so I'll take this, I'll remove this from the excluder and put it to the side. And then here's the front of this hive. I'll slide the hive back on the hive stand, stick it up on its corner and turn it 180 degrees and put it on the ground facing backwards. And then I'll put a new bottom board and the honey super and the brood, the sealed brood, back on top. And it looks something like that. This has got a feeder on it. This is an empty box for the feeder. And here's the queen right part back here. And let me see where I am. And so this cell builder, I'll call this the cell builder now, because they're facing the original direction, they get the field bees. Yeah, they get the field bees. Most of the nurse bees are now in here, right? Because that's where the queen is. And that's where the open brood is. And so I shake the bees, the core of the brood nest, I shake them into this cell builder. So they've got almost all the nurse bees, and they got all the field bees. I put a frame of pollen in it, and I feed them a can of syrup. I make sure there's no queen cells in here. Sometimes when you elevate brood over a queen excluder, they'll start queen cells. So you make sure there's no emergency cells here. And there's no swarm cells here in the queen right part. So now what have I created? A wicked strong unit that's full of nurse bees. They've got all the resources in the world. I'm creating, in this colony, okay, so if I took a colony that already had 8 or 10 frames of brood, and I added 7 more frames of emerging brood and walked away for 10 days, what do you think would happen? They're going to start swarm cells. So they're building up their resources. You know, they're building up the nurse bees, and they've got all this food coming in. Perfect. Isn't that when bees swarm? Isn't that when bees build their own queen cells? Isn't that when we should be building having our bees build queen cells, is when the bees do it anyway? So you're creating this monster that wants to start queen cells, swarm cells. And then you're taking the queen away. So they've got all the resources, all the nurse bees, all the food, and you just made them queenless. In fact, you made them hopelessly queenless, because there's no larvae in there from which to raise a queen. So you go away for the rest of it till the afternoon. 3 hours, 2-3 hours is enough. You go off and you do something. You have lunch, or you work someplace, or you go, whatever you do. Take a break. Listen to music.
You look at the hairy leg.
Right. Whatever. Right. Go to the pub. Relax, you know? And let them get hopelessly queenless. Let them know that there's no hope. And you come back in the afternoon, and this is what you've got. You've got nurse bees. And so you've got a pollen comb in here, and like a really good pollen comb.
And they're not, at that point, they're not defensive because they're not defending anything.
They're not really defensive, no. They're just totally demoralized. and they're crying. You can hear them crying, honestly. They make this hum, they make this whine. They're nasenoffing. You know what a nasenoff gland is? They've all got their nasenoff glands up. They're flying around the apiary like this, looking and looking and looking. And what are they looking for? Maybe, or some way to help themselves. They're crawling around on the outside of the hive. So you come back in the afternoon and to this, and you do your graft. And you graft your larvae into the cups. You know, I don't know if you can see her, but very, very small. The smallest you can handle is the better. Closer to the egg, the better. And this is what you get. This is because you've maximized the nurse bees that have maximized the jelly that's fed to the larvae. And you make these, I mean, that speaks for itself. You very rarely get stumpy queens this way, queen cells. Very rarely. Usually like this. And because they've been fed so well, this is day 10 after graft. So I'm going to put these cells in my mating nukes today, day 10 after graft. Look, there's still jelly in the cups. There was so much jelly in these cups that she couldn't eat it all. Look at the size of her. I mean, there's her wing buds. She's just gotten eye color. She's getting a little body color. Her wing buds are starting to grow. This queen is going to hatch tomorrow or early the following day. But look at the size of her already. That's how you make big queens.
How big are they at that point?
Just about the size of a queen bee. No, but I mean of a mated queen bee. No, they're not that big. No, a good-sized queen. The thorax, the thorax doesn't change size. Thorax has an exoskeleton. So this, I think she's probably getting her exoskeleton at this point. So her thorax isn't going to, the abdomen changes. The abdomen can swell and shrink, but not the thorax.
And what about the cleft that's in the...
Yeah, that'll come. I don't think you can see it there yet, but that will come.
How many cells can you do in that cell builder?
I do 48 grafts in each cell builder, and I usually get 45, 46 take.
Okay. Do you do them on one frame or two frames to maximize the number of bees?
One, because I want all of those cells right next to the pollen comb. They don't move pollen well around the hive. They usually feed, like if you pull out brood and you pull that frame of larvae and the next comb over is going to be a pollen comb. That's the way they do it. So that's the way I do it. Pollen combs are sometimes hard to come by. So sometimes you can't find pollen combs, or you can only find marginal kinds of pollen combs.
That's not an issue here in Florida. You'll always find pollen.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Year-round.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to cull the frames because they get so full of pollen.
Yeah. Well, then we don't have that. I mean, we have, we have good times and bad times, And so what I do is instead of, I'm grafting, I'm doing 4 cell builders every 4 days. From sometime in May until late July.
Do you have any help?
Huh? Oh, yeah, of course.
I was going to say, you pissed your horse to a damn head.
See my hands? But, so what I do is instead of looking, so if I need 4 combs of pollen every 4 days for like 50-something times, you know how much time it would take me to find 50 combs of pollen? So what I do is I take a nice dark empty worker comb and I have pollen traps and I trap pollen and freeze it, and when I need to make a pollen comb, I thaw some pollen out, I dump it on the comb and I work it into the comb with my fingertips until the thing is full of pollen like that. And that's what I give them.
Yeah, but pollen is pollen.
And bee bread is bee, I know. But I'm just telling you.
Pull it up and then it's
I'm
all-
just telling you. I've heard this before. I'm just telling you what works. I can't say why. I can't say what. I mean, okay. So the pollen, when the bees pack it in the cell, they've already added the enzymes and everything to it, and the saliva and whatever, right? They don't do it afterwards, and so it ferments. So I mean, it must be working because I'm getting these queens.
But you are catching the pollen as the bees come in.
Yeah, with a pollen trap. But they've already added the saliva to it when they make a ball of it on their pollen basket, on their corbiculum.
Is it possible they're just taking out what you're up there?
I suppose anything is possible, but all I can do is tell you what works and what I see, and it works.
That cell builder that you make, how many times can you build cells in it? Just that one time? Or do you-
I do it that one time, but let me see if I have something else here. Okay, so I've got a crazy schedule. So I've got an 8-day schedule for raising queen cells. And so every day one is the day I set up with the brood on top of the excluder. All the day ones. And so if I number my days in the month, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, right? Days to me are not, the 15th of the month or the 20th of the month or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. In the summertime, I think day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, really. And then people say, what's today? And I'm not even thinking, I'll say, it's 4. It's 4? 4. 4 is the day we catch queens, okay? So 2 is a nothing, 3 is the day you graft, 4 is the day you catch queens, 5 is the day you have queen cells ready to go back in the mating nukes that you caught yesterday on day 4. 6 is the day you put the comb in the breeder hive so you can graft 5 days later. And 8 is the day that you reunite the cell builder. So the cell builder, 5 days after you graft, the cells are sealed. So then you take the cells off the queen excluder and off the bottom board, and you put the queen right hive back on the stand facing the original direction. You put the queen excluder back on top. You put your partial filled super and your queen cells back on top of that. And 5 days later is 10 days after graft, and that's the day they're ripe. So you harvest in the morning. I harvest the cells, and I put them in my mating nukes. But I'm actually running two 8-day schedules at the same time, but they're 4 days apart. And so day 1s are the same as day 5s, right? And so day 1 is setup day, and day 5 is harvest queen cell day. So I can harvest the queen cells, take them to the mating yard, put them in the nukes, go back to the cell builder, and repeat the process. So I'm getting another, every 20 days, I'm getting another frame of cells out of each one of these, which is one of the things I really like about this, because in the old way, you're using up the resources of your beehives. You're using them up. This way, you're boosting them. And so you get these enormous colonies. And every 20 days, I'm getting another round of queen cells out of them from the same beehives. And so this is the cell building yard. Yeah.
It doesn't stress them out, taking them apart, turning around, putting it back together.
No, no. And I'm looking in them every 10 days, so they're not going to swarm. I mean, and you can see how big they get. I mean, they get ridiculous. So I'll take. So here's the queen right part, and there's the queen excluder, and here's where the cells were, and the super. I'll take the super off. I'll take that off. That's now got combs of nectar. All the brood has emerged. The cells have been taken out. It doesn't have any more brood in it. I'll take those. I'll shake those or brush those bees on the ground in front of the hive. Now I got 8 combs of nectar that I can use for my nukes. And then I'll do it again. I'll make sure there's no queen cells here. I'll put the partially filled super on top of the queen excluder. You might have to add another super down here because look what they're doing. They're getting really strong. And then I'll put 7 more frames of brood and 2 honeys above it. And 10 days later, I'll graft into it. And
You keep a stepladder in your apiary, right?
Actually, two empty bee boxes next to each other with a cover on each one, and then another empty bee box on the top of those with a cover so you can walk up it like stairs, you know. But that works too.
All the while you're making honey.
All the while they're making honey. So at the end of cell building, this is what you got. So these things have made enough queen cells for me to harvest 1,200 queens, and they made 4,400 pounds of honey. And that's the difference between using up the resources in your beehives and boosting the resources in your beehives. Now you have to winter them. Oh, I don't know if let's see, did I? Well, if I don't have it later, I'll say it now. So in 2011, I saved 50 nukes, overwintered nukes. And that's the first time I used brood factories. And I built them up and harvested brood like that. And so I made 35 cell builders between, say, May 10th and, say, June 15th to raise my queen cells and get my queens mated. And then we started, then the first queens are usually mated about June 15th. So I finished setting up cell builders. I got a bunch, and since I run so many at a time, I have a lot in different stages, you know. Some just got grafted into, some just got set up, some have cells coming out. And so when I got done setting up cell builders...
If you ever went out and got drunk, you'd have a hell of a time, wouldn't you?
Oh, I would. I would. I wouldn't get much done, but that's nighttime. But you got to sleep, you know. When you see bees in your brain all night long, you know, you got to... Issues.
You're in love, pal.
Issues.
You're in love.
I suppose. It's too bad they sting. But anyway, so then I started making nucleus colonies. So those 50 brood factories were still giving me brood. So then I started, instead of making more cell builders, I started using the brood to make nucleus colonies to be wintered over. And I went along and made 330 nucleus colonies. So from those 50 nucleus colonies that I overwintered, I made 35 cell builders. Each got 7 frames of brood. That's 245 frames of brood. And then I made 330 nucleus colonies, which is 660 frames of brood. So I harvested over 900 frames of brood from those 50 brood factories. So, you know, how much is a nuke worth? I mean, even if you had to buy your queens, how much is a nuke worth? So if they're going for 135, which I saw just advertised recently in Florida, you know, say 150 to make it easy to figure, and that's 15,000 per 100, and 330 is, you know, so you got to keep back 50 because you got to make some next year. So that reduces the total number by 50. Plus you're going to lose a % in the winter. You know, 10% for me, 10% is high for losing in the winter. When you're first starting it out, I would expect you'd lose 20 or 25% of them, but you'll get it back. But even if you lost 20%, so you had 300 and you kept 50, that's 280, and you lost 30 because of the winter or more. So you're down around 250, say, and that's conservative. 250 times 135 all came from your apiary. All came from your apiary. You like your day job? But that's the way you make money with bees. And right now, it's the bees that are worth the money. You know, the honey is worth, yeah, if you can make a honey crop. I happen to be in an area where we make a honey crop. I made almost 30 tons last year. But not everybody is in an area where you can make honey crops. But everybody can make bees. And if you have good bees, they'll bang your door down trying to get at them. So now you have to winter these things. So here we go. This is the great ice storm of 1998. And they've just buried everything. Branches and ice and 3-story hives again. And so you have to feed them. if they don't have enough food. One of the advantages of having a double-story nuke is they put a lot of honey in the top 4 combs, and you don't have to feed them so much. So you feed them what they need to be fed. A double-story nuke like that was probably, for me, in my area, is going to need the 4 combs in the top fully capped of honey, and probably a couple of combs in the bottom box fully capped with honey. To get you could winter, I'm sure, with a lot less than that. And so you don't feed them fill up everything, every cell. They need clustering space. So this is from the hive and the honeybee. And this is clustering space. So here's the double deep, and this is comb. This is honey, and this is pollen. And you can see where the bees are between the frames of bees. These are all bees. They got a little dotted line here that shows you the cluster. And here's the cluster going down here like that. And here's the core of the brood nest. And here's the clustering space. And the way that the bees regulate the temperature of the core of the brood nest is how many of those cells have a bee in them. If the more of those empty cells that have a bee in them, the higher the temperature of the core of the brood nest. And the more empty cells, the lower the core of the brood nest. And so they can regulate the core of the brood nest just by how many bees they pack into those empty cells. Well, if you feed this thing so much sugar syrup that the whole thing is full of syrup, or honey, if they're honey bound, they have a hard time regulating their temperature. You don't need to feed them until they won't take anymore, which is very common up north. Very common practice. How much do I feed my bees? Feed them until they won't take anymore. Huh. Do you have a teenage son? Feed them until they won't take anymore, eh? I don't think so. Bees are the same way. They'll just take it and take it and take it. And fill up everything. So you don't need to do that. So then this is these are our Nucleus colonies being ready for winter. So just like, we need an upper entrance where I keep bees to let the excess moisture out. You might not have that because you don't have that cold weather. But the moisture given off by respiration condenses on the inside of the hive. And if there's no upper entrance, it really gets wet in there, and they die from the moisture. So with an upper entrance like this, it lets the excess moisture out of the hive in the wintertime. And you have to put insulation on the inner cover because the water vapor hits the cold inner cover, condenses, drips on the bees, they're dead. They cannot live with being wet like that. So we put a piece of styrofoam on top, upper entrance, and wrap a piece of tar paper around them. And that absorbs the heat from the sun. So on really cold days in the winter, it's usually clear out. The sun is usually shining on the coldest days. And so it hits that black paper and helps warm up the microclimate around and in the hive. And they can move over and get some stores and bring some stores in. Or if you have a marginal, you can it's almost warm enough for a cleansing flight, but not quite. But with the black paper on that, it warms it up just enough right around the hive. I've seen them come out and have a cleansing flight and never get 5 feet from the hive. The snow in front of right down the row is just as yellow as can be. And there's no poops out there in the snow anywhere. They just came out and defecated and went right back in again. Wouldn't have done that, I don't believe, without that black paper on there. So this is my cell building yard. These are the brood factories. And these are the cell builders back over in here.
What do you do about windbreaks?
Well, look around. A lot of trees, a lot of brush. Yeah.
You select those sites, or
Sure.
you move it? Do you move much, or
No.
Permanent sites?
Permanent. Yeah, I don't move anymore. I don't like moving bees. I hate moving bees. It's the worst. It was the worst part. You work all day and you work all night, moving bees.
I just wanted to say we have another group coming in behind us.
Oh, okay, I'm almost done. Oh, jeez.
All the dancers are supposed
Oh, yeah, right. Oh, well, can't we wait? Can't we like wait a little longer? So anyway, so this is what I mentioned about the 330 nucleus colonies, and you make whole apiaries of nucleus colonies out of nucleus colonies. So how do you get this started? Well, a lot of people here don't have the resources, but you got a club apiary, don't you? Do you have a club apiary? So couldn't you learn how to make nucleus colonies in your club apiary? And couldn't you run a queen rearing program? And you can learn how to raise queen bees, and people can go home either with queen cells or with mated queens. So that's how you do it. You know, where we are, queen breeders they don't have anybody to sell their queens to because they can't get queens mated until the middle of June, and everybody wants their queens in the middle of May. And so they don't bother because nobody buys their queens. Well, but if everybody started raising nucleus colonies and these guys had a place to sell their queens in the middle of the summertime, then they're going to start raising more queens. There'll be more queens available for you. You can make your nucleus colonies with local stock. That's how you do it. So, thank you.